Oh, Evelyn. I'm so relieved you found something useful to do after the divorce. Madeline Brooks said it softly, almost kindly, the way certain women could wrap a blade in velvet and call it sympathy. The showroom went quiet for half a second, so brief that only Evelyn Carter seemed to hear it fully. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Carter and Vale home, Soho moved through a silver winter morning, taxis sliding over wet pavement, pedestrians tucked into wool coats, steam rising from a manhole in pale ribbons. Inside, everything was controlled warmth, champagne-colored light, walnut panels polished to a low glow, the faint scent of cedar, linen, and fresh white roses arranged in a stone vase near the reception desk. Madeline stood in the center of it all, as if she had already purchased the air. Her cream cashmere coat fell perfectly from her shoulders, her diamond wedding ring catching the light each time she lifted her hand to gesture at some custom chair or hand-woven rug. Two friends hovered behind her, smiling with the delicate hunger of people who had come not only to shop, but to witness a small humiliation. Evelyn looked up from the leather-bound design book in her hands. She wore an ivory blazer without a visible label, dark tailored trousers, and a pair of simple pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. Her hair was pinned low at the nape of her neck. Nothing about her announced power, and that was exactly why Madeline mistook her stillness for defeat. "Madeline," Evelyn said, her voice even. Not warm, not cold, just steady enough to make one of the junior consultants glance nervously toward the private office at the back, where Evelyn's name was etched in brushed brass beneath the words founder and creative director. Evelyn caught the glance and gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Madeline smiled wider, encouraged by the silence. "Nate told me you always had a sweet little eye for domestic things. Pillows, curtains, table settings. It's nice that you turned it into this." She let her gaze travel around the showroom, approving and condescending at once, unaware that every wall color, every scent, every piece of furniture arranged beneath the skylights had passed through Evelyn's hands before it ever reached the public. One of Madeline's friends gave a tiny laugh into her coffee cup. Evelyn closed the design book with care. The soft thud of leather against paper sounded louder than it should have. "What can Carter and Vale help you with today?" she asked. Madeline's face brightened, because she enjoyed being served by someone she believed had once stood where she now stood. "The penthouse," she said. "Nate and I are redesigning it completely. I want it to feel like a new beginning. Fresh, elegant, nothing sad, nothing leftover." At that word, her eyes returned to Evelyn's face. Leftover. The showroom lights reflected in the glass behind them, turning the room into a layered image. Madeline in front, glittering and certain. Evelyn behind her, quiet and unreadable. And beyond them both, the city that had once watched Evelyn leave her marriage with 2 suitcases, a folder of sketches, and no one powerful enough to defend her. For a moment, the scent of cedar shifted into memory. Rain on the night of the divorce. Nate's voice saying she would be more comfortable with something smaller. The elevator doors closing on the home she had designed but no longer owned. Then the present returned, crisp and polished. Evelyn opened a fresh order folder and placed a black pen beside it. "Full residence redesigns begin at $400,000, she said. "Depending on custom work, installation, and procurement, the final number may be higher." Madeline barely blinked. "Perfect. I want the best package. Nate says I should have whatever I want." The front door opened before Evelyn could answer, letting in a breath of cold air and the low noise of the street. Nathaniel Brooks stepped inside, tall, composed, wrapped in a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than the monthly rent on Evelyn's first Brooklyn studio. For 3 years, she had imagined this moment would hurt more. Instead, she felt something quieter than pain and stronger than anger. Recognition without longing. Nate stopped when he saw her. His eyes moved over her face, her clothes, the folder beneath her hand, searching for the version of Evelyn he had left behind, softened by apology, reduced by loss, grateful for notice. He did not find her. Madeline turned, delighted. "There you are. Look who's helping us." She slipped her hand through his arm and leaned against him with theatrical ease. "Evelyn works here now." Nate's expression flickered. "Evelyn," he said, careful, almost cautious. "You work here." Evelyn rested her fingertips on the folder embossed with the Carter and Vale crest. Around her, The staff held their breath. For now, she said. Madeline laughed, not understanding the weight of the answer. Isn't that lucky? She already knows the penthouse. Though, of course, we'll need to erase most of what was there before. She turned back to Evelyn, suddenly all business. I want warm neutrals, imported stone, custom lighting, maybe Italian linen in the primary suite. Nothing too sentimental. This is a wife's home now, not a memory box. Nate looked down, but said nothing. That silence, Evelyn realized, was the final signature on a document he had begun years ago. She nodded and began writing. Item by item, Madeline ordered beauty as if it were proof of victory. A $38,000 dining table, hand-finished wall panels, private art sourcing, expedited installation before the spring charity dinner. The total climbed past $500,000. Madeline signed without reading closely, her diamond flashing over the page. When she finished, she slid the contract back with a satisfied smile. I hope this commission helps you, Evelyn. Truly. Evelyn looked at the signature, then at the name printed above the approval line Madeline had ignored. Evelyn Carter, founder and creative director. She placed the folder beneath her hand, protecting the truth a little longer. I'm sure, she said softly, it will be very revealing. For a few seconds after Nate entered, the showroom seemed to balance on a thread no one dared touch. The junior consultants returned to their tablets, but their movements were too careful, their smiles too still. They all knew who Evelyn was. They knew the woman standing behind the walnut consultation table was not an employee hoping for a commission, but the reason the company had a 6-month waiting list and clients from Manhattan to Palm Beach. Madeline, however, only saw what she wanted to see. She saw an ex-wife in quiet clothes, a woman without a husband beside her, a woman who had once lost the penthouse and now stood inside a showroom taking notes for the person who had replaced her. That misunderstanding warmed Madeline like sunlight. Nate, tell her about the charity dinner, she said, squeezing his arm. I want everything ready before then. The board members, the donors, the photographers. It has to look effortless, but expensive enough that everyone knows effort was involved. Nate cleared his throat, still watching Evelyn with a discomfort he tried to disguise as politeness. It is in April, he said. About 8 weeks out. We are hosting a private reception for the Brooks Residential Expansion Fund. Evelyn wrote the date without looking up. 8 weeks is a narrow timeline for custom work. Madeline tilted her head. But possible, right? I mean, for the right client. There it was again, that soft little assumption that money was the only language worth speaking. Evelyn turned one page in the folder. For the right project, she said. Nate's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. He remembered that tone. Not the words, perhaps, but the steadiness beneath them. It was the same calm she had carried years ago when his first investor dinner had nearly fallen apart because the caterer canceled 4 hours before guests arrived. Evelyn had not panicked. She had rolled up her sleeves, called 3 small restaurants in Brooklyn, rearranged the apartment herself, and turned disaster into an evening people still talked about. Nate had taken the credit the next morning. He had called it instinct. His instinct. Evelyn remembered it too, but not with bitterness sharp enough to cut. The memory had dulled into evidence. Back then, she had thought love meant standing just outside the spotlight and making sure he looked good in it. She had chosen the paint for his first office, softened the hard edges of his bachelor apartment, written thank you notes to investors he forgot to call, and learned which wives liked peonies and which executives drank sparkling water instead of bourbon. None of it appeared on balance sheets. None of it went into speeches. Yet those rooms had opened doors for him. Those dinners had built trust before he ever signed a contract. And still, by the end, Nate had looked at her across a marble kitchen island and said, "You do not understand what it takes to build something real." The pen in Evelyn's hand paused for less than a second. Then she continued. Madeline wandered toward a display of fabric samples, dragging her fingers over Belgian linen and Italian wool, as if she were granting approval to a world that had already judged her taste. This one is pretty, she said, lifting a pale ivory swatch. Very bridal. Very clean. Evelyn glanced at it. That is from our Ashford collection. It is treated for durability, but it can stain under heavy use. Madeline laughed. Oh, we will not be living roughly, Evelyn. One of her friends smiled. Madeline wants the penthouse to feel like a magazine cover. No, Madeline corrected, looking toward Nate. I want it to feel like the kind of place a successful man should have come home to all along. The sentence landed softly, but Nate heard it. Evelyn did too. Years ago, it might have found the old wound. It might have made her chest tighten, made her wonder whether she had failed at elegance, at marriage, at being the woman a man like Nate wanted beside him. But the old Evelyn had spent too many nights measuring herself against standards that kept moving. This Evelyn had invoices to approve, artisans to pay, a London client awaiting sketches, and a company built from the very silence they mistook for weakness. She lifted another sample, a warm taupe silk blend with a faint gold undertone. For the main living room, this would photograph better at night, especially under west-facing city light. Madeline blinked, caught off guard by the precision. Fine, use that. Nate looked toward the windows, where the gray morning reflected his own face back at him. For a moment, he seemed close to asking the question hovering between them. How did you know that? How did you become this? But Madeline was already signing the deposit. Authorization, already smiling as if she had won something priceless. Evelyn accepted the paperwork and slid it into the folder. The total now sat at $620,000 before taxes, delivery, and installation. Madeline handed over her black card with a little flourish. I trust the company can handle discretion, she said. The last thing we need is gossip about Nate's old life mixing with our new one. Evelyn met her eyes then, fully. The showroom lights softened the planes of her face, but did nothing to dim the quiet authority there. Discretion, she said, is one of the reasons our clients come to us. Madeline smiled, satisfied. Nate did not. He had finally noticed something he should have seen the moment he walked in. The employees were not looking at Evelyn the way staff looked at a coworker. They were looking at her the way people looked at the person whose name was on the door. Madeline left the showroom with the glowing confidence of a woman who believed she had purchased not only furniture, but proof. Proof that she belonged in the penthouse now. Proof that Nate's past could be boxed, removed, and replaced by imported stone, warm brass, and perfectly measured drapery. She did not see the way the receptionist exhaled after the glass door closed. She did not hear the quiet click of Evelyn's office door when the staff finally allowed themselves to breathe again. Evelyn carried the contract into the private office at the back, a room hidden behind a wall of shelving and antique design books. It was not large, but every inch of it belonged to her. The desk was oak, scarred at one corner from the first studio she had rented in Brooklyn. The framed charcoal sketch above the credenza was the first concept drawing she had made after leaving Nate. The lines still faintly smudged where rain had touched the paper that night. Outside, Soho continued in muted motion, but inside the office, time folded back on itself. Evelyn placed Madeline's signed order beside the sketch and let her fingers rest on the edge of the page. She remembered the first version of the penthouse long before it became a symbol of everything she lost. Back then, it had been an empty shell 42 floors above the city, all concrete floors, exposed wiring, and windows wide enough to make Manhattan look like a promise. Nate had walked through it with a broker, already talking about resale value, investor impressions, and skyline views. Evelyn had stood near the unfinished kitchen and imagined warmth. A low linen sofa facing the western light. Shelves filled with books instead of awards. A dining table long enough for friends who laughed after dessert. You think too small, Nate had told her when she described it. This place has to impress people. So she had learned to impress people. Not for herself, not then, but for him. She had studied lighting temperatures, furniture makers, art placement, floral timing, even the way a room changed when people felt safe enough to lower their voices. Nate's first major developer dinner happened in that penthouse on a Thursday in November. The city glittered beyond the glass. Evelyn had set the table with matte black plates, ivory candles, and hand-lettered place cards because Nate had forgotten two investors disliked each other and needed to be seated apart. By midnight, one of them had agreed to back his first luxury conversion project. The next morning, a business magazine called Nate a visionary with rare instincts for atmosphere. Evelyn had clipped the article and tucked it into a drawer, telling herself it was enough that she knew. It was not enough. It had never been enough. The more successful Nate became, the smaller he asked her to be. When she suggested starting a design studio, he smiled as though she had mentioned a hobby. When she stayed up sketching, he called it charming. When clients at his events asked who had created the space, he answered before she could. Evelyn keeps herself busy. Those words had sounded harmless to everyone else. To her, they had been a door closing slowly from the inside. Then came Madeline, bright and camera-ready, hired to promote one of Nate's downtown properties. She posted rooftop sunsets, champagne glasses, and carefully filtered glimpses of a life Evelyn had built but no longer recognized. Nate began saying Madeline understood branding. Madeline understood ambition. Madeline knew how to stand beside a man who was going places. Evelyn had been standing beside him for 8 years. He simply had not noticed because she was holding the foundation, not the spotlight. The divorce came wrapped in polite language and polished paperwork. Nate kept the penthouse. Evelyn kept her sketches. He kept the story. She kept the silence. For a while, silence was all she could afford. Her first studio in Brooklyn had a radiator that clanged through the night and windows that rattled whenever trucks passed below. She painted the walls herself in an old college sweatshirt. She ordered fabric samples with money meant for groceries. She answered every email, packed every box, swept the floor after midnight, and fell asleep on a borrowed sofa with measurements written on her wrist. There had been no applause, no diamond ring catching light, no one calling her brave in a showroom. Only work, and the stubborn belief that beauty could be built by a woman no one had bothered to credit. Evelyn opened the Mercer file again and looked at Madeline's signature. The name felt almost ceremonial, a flourish beneath $500,000 of misunderstanding. Her assistant, Grace, appeared in the doorway holding a tablet. "Should I assign the senior team?" she asked carefully. Evelyn looked once more at the old rain-marked sketch, then at the new contract. Her face remained calm, but something in her eyes had settled into place. "Yes," she said. "Give them the best." Grace hesitated. Even after what she said, Evelyn closed the folder with quiet precision. Especially after what she said. Let the work be flawless. Some truths are more powerful when they arrive beautifully. By the second week of the project, the penthouse had become a quiet theater of replacement. Carter and Vale delivery crews arrived before sunrise in clean black vans, carrying wrapped stone samples, custom millwork, bolts of linen, and crates marked fragile in careful white lettering. The building staff knew Evelyn's team by name, though none of them knew why the woman approving the work never came upstairs during the first installations. She remained in the Soho office, reviewing photographs on a large monitor, adjusting details with the calm precision of someone restoring a room without allowing it to restore her. The penthouse looked different now. The hard chrome edges Nate once loved had been softened. The cold white walls had given way to a warm limestone finish that caught the afternoon light like pale honey. The formal living room, once designed to impress men who spoke in numbers and acquisitions, now held a low-curved sofa in taupe silk, 2 walnut lounge chairs, and a hand-woven rug with faint gold threads that only appeared when the sun fell just right. Madeline adored it. She sent voice messages to her friends from room to room, her excitement floating through the space like perfume. "It is becoming exactly what I imagined," she said, standing barefoot on the new rug while a Carter and Vale installer measured the window panels behind her. "Elegant, soft, powerful. Not like before." The installer said nothing. Carter and Vale employees were trained in discretion, but more than that, they were loyal. They had seen Evelyn arrive at the office before dawn and leave long after the cleaning crew. They had watched her build a company where no one was called small for caring about details. So when Madeline made little comments about the old life of the penthouse, they answered with silence and perfect measurements. Nate came home late most evenings and found the apartment changing faster than he expected. At first, he approved. The redesigned rooms would photograph well for the April reception. Investors liked confidence, and the penthouse was becoming confidence translated into fabric, stone, and light. Yet beneath his approval was a discomfort he could not name. He would pause in the hallway, looking at a console table positioned exactly where evening light skimmed across its surface, and feel the past brush against him like a sleeve in a crowd. Evelyn used to do that. She used to move a lamp 2 inches and make a room breathe. She used to know when a chair looked expensive but felt unwelcoming, when a dining table was impressive but too wide for conversation, when flowers should sit low enough for people to see each other over dinner. He had dismissed those things as taste. Now strangers charged $620,000 for the same instincts he had once treated as background noise. One Thursday evening, Madeline found him standing in the half-finished dining room, staring at the new table. It was not the one Evelyn had chosen years ago, but it carried the same philosophy: long enough for ceremony, narrow enough for connection. "You look serious," Madeline said, entering with a glass of sparkling water and her phone in hand. "Do you hate it?" Nate blinked, returning from somewhere he did not want to admit he had gone. "No. It is beautiful." "Of course it is." She smiled, pleased. "I told Evelyn exactly what we needed." The name settled between them. Nate adjusted his cuff. "She seems different." Madeline gave a light laugh. "Different from what?" "The quiet little wife who never wanted attention." He did not answer. Madeline stepped closer, lowering her voice into something sweet and sharpened. "Do not tell me you feel guilty. She is fine. She has a job. We gave her a very generous project. Honestly, I think it is kind of us." Nate looked toward the windows. The city was beginning to glow beneath them, millions of lights clicking on like witnesses. He remembered Evelyn sitting in that same glow, years earlier, sketchbook on her knees, asking if he thought people could feel cared for by a room. He had been answering emails and had barely heard her. "Kind," he repeated, but the word felt poorly made in his mouth. Madeline did not notice. She was already scrolling through photos of the nearly finished living room, choosing which angle would make the best social media reveal. "The reception is going to be perfect," she said. "Everyone will see we are the future." Nate nodded because that was what he was supposed to do. But for the first time since the divorce, the future he had built felt strangely haunted by the woman he had left in the past. The final week before the reception arrived with the hush of a held breath. In the Soho showroom, Evelyn moved through the morning with the quiet discipline that had built her company from a rented Brooklyn room into a name, whispered by people who cared about beautiful things. She approved the last shipment of Italian linen, corrected a lighting schedule by 15 minutes to match sunset over the Hudson River, and reviewed photographs of the penthouse until the space on the screen looked less like a home Nate had taken from her and more like a room finally telling the truth. Grace stood beside her desk with a tablet, scrolling through the installation notes. "Everything will be complete by Friday afternoon," she said. "Madeline wants you there personally for the final walkthrough." Evelyn looked up. "Personally?" Grace hesitated, the way people did when they were trying to deliver insult without letting it touch the person they respected. Her message said she would feel more comfortable if the woman who knew the old space could help make sure nothing of the old energy remained. For a moment, only the soft hum of the office heater filled the room. Evelyn's face did not change, but her hand stilled on the edge of the desk. Old energy. It was a polished phrase, harmless enough to anyone who had not once stood barefoot in that penthouse at 2 a.m, rearranging flowers before Nate's first investor breakfast because she wanted the room to feel welcoming. Harmless to anyone who had not chosen the original kitchen stools, folded linen napkins, labeled wine glasses, and waited alone for a husband who returned home smelling of restaurant smoke and ambition. Evelyn closed the file. "I will be there." Grace frowned gently. "You do not have to prove anything to her." Evelyn's gaze moved to the rain-marked sketch on the wall, the first drawing she had saved from the night she left. "I am not going for her." On Friday, the elevator opened onto the penthouse foyer with a sound Evelyn remembered too well. It was a soft mechanical sigh, a release into altitude and glass. For one heartbeat, her body recognized the place before her mind could defend itself. The scent was different now, cedar and new fabric instead of Nate's sharp cologne and cold marble polish, but the view was the same. Manhattan stretched beyond the windows in late afternoon gold, the streets far below moving like thin streams of light. Madeline was waiting in the living room wearing a pale blue dress and the expression of someone unveiling a masterpiece she believed she had created. "Evelyn," she said brightly. "You came. Wonderful. I thought it might be emotional for you, but you seem very professional." Evelyn stepped inside, her heels making almost no sound on the new floor. "Professional is what you hired us for." Nate stood near the fireplace with his hands in his pockets. He looked tired in a way expensive tailoring could not hide. His eyes followed Evelyn as she moved through the room, not with the old impatience, but with something more uncertain. Madeline began the walkthrough like a hostess on a private tour, pointing out each piece with pride. The curved sofa, the limestone wall, the hand-blown glass lamps, the dining table that could seat 14 without making conversation feel like a negotiation. She spoke as if she had summoned elegance through desire alone. Evelyn listened, making notes only when necessary, adjusting a cushion by half an inch, checking the fall of a curtain, smoothing the corner of a runner near the hallway. It was strange, Nate thought, watching her. She did not move like someone visiting a place she had lost. She moved like someone inspecting work that bore her signature in every shadow. Madeline stopped before the main windows and clasped her hands. I have to admit, you did better than I expected. When Nate told me you were always good with little home things, I thought he was being generous. She laughed lightly, expecting the room to join her. Nate did not. Evelyn looked at the skyline instead of Madeline. The sun had begun to lower, touching the glass towers with copper fire. Little things are rarely little, she said. They are usually what people notice after the grand gestures stop impressing them. Nate's face changed, almost imperceptibly. He had heard that wisdom too late. Madeline's smile thinned, but before she could reply, the private elevator chimed again. A man stepped out with silver hair, a navy overcoat, and the unhurried confidence of someone who never needed to announce his importance. Thomas Vale glanced around the finished penthouse, then smiled directly at Evelyn. There you are, he said warmly. I was hoping to see the final result before tomorrow. The board will want your opinion before we discuss Brooks Residential. Madeline's hand tightened around her phone. Nate went very still. Evelyn turned from the window, calm as the room she had remade. The first crack had appeared, and she had not lifted a finger to make it. Thomas Vale did not raise his voice, yet the room seemed to rearrange itself around him. He removed his gloves with unhurried care and looked across the penthouse as if he were reading a report written in texture, proportion, and light. The silver in his hair caught the last of the sunset. His navy overcoat was simple, beautifully cut, and free of any visible logo. Men like Thomas did not wear wealth as decoration. They carried it like weather. Madeline recovered first, stepping forward with the polished smile she reserved for people who might improve her life. Mr. Vale, what a wonderful surprise. Nate has told me so much about you. Thomas turned to her politely. Mrs. Brooks. The greeting was correct, but brief. Then his attention returned to Evelyn. You have done what you always do, he said. You made the room feel inevitable. Evelyn gave a small smile. The bones were strong. They only needed honesty. Nate's eyes moved between them. Something cold and alert had entered his expression. You two know each other? He asked. Thomas gave him the kind of look that did not insult, because it did not need to. Evelyn is my business partner. The words landed softly, and for that reason, they landed harder. Madeline's smile held for 1 second too long before it began to falter. Business partner? Thomas nodded. Carter and Vale Home. I provided early capital and strategic guidance. Evelyn built the company. In the silence that followed, the city outside seemed suddenly too bright, the windows too clear, the finished room too full of witnesses. Madeline looked at Evelyn, then at the sofa, the lamps, the limestone wall, the dining table, the entire curated perfection she had been praising for weeks. Her mouth parted, but no graceful sentence arrived. Nate stood so still he appeared carved into the room. Carter and Vale. The name had been in front of him the entire time, on contracts, emails, delivery receipts, payment confirmations. He had seen the second name and thought of old money. He had seen the first and somehow failed to see Evelyn at all. It was an old habit, perhaps the oldest one between them. Thomas walked toward the windows, hands folded behind his back. Brooks Residential has a strong expansion proposal, he said, speaking now to Nate. Impressive numbers. Aggressive growth. Attractive locations. Nate straightened instinctively, returning to the language he understood. We believe the next 18 months are critical. The market is ready for branded residential experiences at a more intimate scale. Yes, Thomas said. That is why the board requested an independent assessment of the company's design integrity, lifestyle positioning, and long-term brand value. Madeline's face lost another shade of color. Nate's gaze shifted, slowly, toward Evelyn. He already knew. He knew before Thomas said it because the truth had begun taking shape the moment the older man walked through the elevator doors. Thomas continued, calm and precise. Evelyn is leading that assessment. Madeline gave a small laugh, too bright to be real. I am sorry, are you saying Evelyn is evaluating Nate's company? Not Nate. Evelyn said, her voice quiet. The company. The distinction was gentle, but it stripped away the personal drama Madeline had been trying to cling to. This was not an ex-wife getting even. This was not a wounded woman returning to make a scene. This was business. This was credibility. This was the kind of authority that did not need a raised voice to change the temperature of a room. Nate looked at Evelyn with an expression she had never seen on him during their marriage. Not irritation. Not pity. Not impatience. Respect, arriving late and dressed as shock. "Evelyn," he said, and for the first time her name sounded less like something he owned and more like something he had lost permission to touch. Madeline turned sharply toward him, hearing it too. "Nate, did you know about this?" He did not answer. Quickly enough. That was answer enough. Evelyn closed her tablet case and handed it to Grace, who had arrived silently with the final installation documents. "The residence is complete," Evelyn said. "The final invoice will be sent Monday morning. As for Brooks Residential, my report will be submitted directly to the board." Madeline stared at her. "You cannot be serious. After everything, you expect us to believe you will be objective?" Evelyn met her gaze without anger. "Madeline, objectivity is not the absence of history. It is the discipline not to let history do the work for you." Thomas's mouth curved faintly, not quite a smile, more like approval. Nate lowered his eyes. The words found him because they were true. For years, he had let his version of Evelyn do the thinking for him. Quiet meant small. Gentle meant weak. Supportive meant less important. Now she stood in his redesigned penthouse, surrounded by the proof of her mind, holding no grudge in her hands, and still somehow holding the room. The private elevator chimed again as a caterer arrived for the next day's reception, pushing a cart of glassware that glittered beneath the ceiling lights. The ordinary sound broke the spell, but not the truth. Nothing in the penthouse had changed. Everything in it had. The reception began the next evening beneath a sky the color of polished steel. By 7 o'clock, the penthouse had filled with the controlled murmur of wealth. Low laughter, crystal glasses touching, the soft rhythm of a jazz trio hired to make ambition sound elegant. Candlelight moved across the limestone walls Evelyn had chosen, warmed the walnut surfaces her team had installed, and settled on the faces of investors who had come to decide whether Nate Brooks was still the kind of man worth betting on. Madeline stood near the entrance in a white silk dress, greeting guests with the bright, practiced ease of someone determined to reclaim the room. If the previous afternoon had shaken her, she had buried it beneath makeup, diamonds, and a smile sharpened by pride. "Welcome," she said again and again, accepting compliments as though each one restored something Thomas Vale had quietly taken from her. "We wanted the space to feel intimate, but elevated. Personal, but world-class." No one questioned the word we. Not yet. Nate moved through the crowd with a glass of sparkling water in his hand, speaking about market shifts, private residences, lifestyle integration, and the future of boutique development. His voice was steady, his suit immaculate, his answers polished. But every time someone praised the penthouse, his eyes searched the room before he could stop himself. Evelyn had not arrived. That should have relieved him. Instead, her absence pressed against the evening more heavily than her presence might have. He noticed everything now. The way guests drifted naturally toward the seating area because the chairs invited conversation instead of performance. The way the dining room lights softened everyone's faces without dimming the artwork. The way the space made people feel included, cared for, quietly impressed. It was not decoration. It was persuasion. It was strategy in fabric and light. And for years, he had called it little home things. Across the room, Madeline laughed too loudly at a developer's joke, her fingers resting on Nate's arm whenever anyone looked too long at him. She could feel the invisible question moving through the guests as more people recognized the Carter and Vale workmanship. One woman from a museum board leaned close to another and whispered, "This feels like Evelyn Carter's hand." Madeline heard it. Her smile did not move, but something in her eyes tightened. At 7:45, Thomas Vale arrived with 2 members of his investment board and a calm that made the room subtly shift toward him. He greeted Nate, complimented the turnout, then accepted a tour from Madeline, who pointed out the room's best features with careful confidence. Thomas listened kindly. Too kindly. "The balance is excellent," he said, looking at the main living area. "The restraint, the warmth, the intelligence." Madeline's shoulders relaxed. "Thank you." I knew the old apartment needed a complete transformation. Thomas glanced at her. Transformation requires understanding what was already there. The sentence was mild, but Madeline felt the warning inside. Before she could answer, the private elevator opened. Conversation did not stop all at once. It thinned, then slowed, then reshaped itself around the woman stepping into the foyer. Evelyn Carter wore a deep charcoal dress with long sleeves and a clean neckline, simple enough not to compete with the room, elegant enough to make every diamond nearby seem suddenly loud. Her hair was swept back softly. No dramatic entrance. No entourage. Only Grace beside her with a slim leather portfolio and the quiet confidence of a woman who had no need to announce ownership. Nate saw her first. For a moment, the reception, the investors, the future he was trying to secure, all blurred behind one impossible truth. She looked at home, but not because the penthouse had once belonged to her. She looked at home because the room answered to her. Madeline crossed the space quickly, her smile returning like a shield. "Evelyn," she said, bright enough for nearby guests to hear. "How generous of you to come. I hope this is not too difficult." Evelyn accepted the remark without blinking. "It is a completed project. I came to see it in use." Several heads turned. Thomas approached then, saving no one from the moment. "Evelyn," he said warmly, "the board was just admiring your work. The word your passed through the air with the softness of falling silk and the weight of a sealed verdict." Madeline's face held, but barely. A man near the bar lowered his glass. A woman by the windows whispered, "She designed this?" Thomas did not whisper. Designed, led, and approved. Carter and Vale has become one of the most disciplined firms in the country for residential brand environments. That is why her evaluation matters tonight. Nate felt the room tilt toward Evelyn, not with scandal, but with recognition. That was worse. Scandal could be denied. Recognition could not. Evelyn looked around the penthouse, at the guests standing beneath her lighting, seated on her furniture, praising the atmosphere she had built from a life they had once watched her lose. Then she turned to Thomas. "The space is performing exactly as intended," she said. "People are comfortable enough to listen." Thomas smiled. "Then let us hope the company has something worth saying." Nate lowered his eyes to his untouched glass. Across from him, Madeline stood inside the most beautiful room she had ever claimed, finally understanding that claiming a thing and creating it were not the same. The evening moved forward, but not evenly. After Thomas's words, every compliment Madeline received seemed to pass through Evelyn first, as though the room itself had corrected the record. Guests who had admired the penthouse now wanted to know about the design process, the brand strategy, the way physical space could influence investor confidence. Evelyn answered with calm precision, never mentioning the past, never taking cheap satisfaction from the awkwardness blooming across Madeline's face. She spoke of sight lines, acoustics, material honesty, and the importance of making private residences feel lived in rather than staged. Her voice was low enough that people leaned closer to hear it. That, Nate realized, had always been her power. She never chased attention. She made attention come to rest. Madeline stood near the fireplace, smiling so tightly her cheeks ached. This was supposed to have been her night, her proof that she had transformed Nate's life into something brighter, younger, more desirable. She had imagined guests admiring her taste, photographers capturing her beside the limestone wall, Nate's investors seeing the woman who could help him move gracefully through the next tier of society. Instead, one by one, they turned to Evelyn with the kind of respect Madeline had tried to purchase and could not quite imitate. "Ms. Carter," said a woman from a private family office, holding a glass of mineral water, "I have a property in Nantucket that has been impossible to make feel personal. May I contact your office?" Evelyn smiled. "Of course. Grace can coordinate a consultation." Madeline looked down at the rug beneath her heels, suddenly aware that even the ground supporting her was part of Evelyn's work. Nate crossed to Evelyn when the crowd thinned for a moment near the hallway. He kept a careful distance, as if the air around her now had rules. "You could have told me," he said quietly. Evelyn turned her eyes toward him. "Told you what?" "That Carter and Vale was yours." The jazz trio began a slower song in the living room, soft piano notes falling between them like rain remembered from another life. Evelyn looked past him toward the dining table, where three investors were laughing over something Thomas had said. "The paperwork told you." The contracts told you. The staff told you. The name told you. Nate's face tightened, not with anger, but with the discomfort of a man being asked to look at his own blindness. I did not think. No, she said gently. You did not. He absorbed that because there was nothing else to do with the truth. Madeline saw them speaking and moved toward them before she could stop herself. Is everything all right? She asked, her voice too sweet. Evelyn stepped back slightly, allowing the question to belong to the marriage it came from. Everything is fine. Madeline's gaze flicked between them. Good. Because tonight is very important for Nate. Thomas approached before the silence could harden. It is important for everyone involved, he said. That is why we will begin the board discussion in the library in 10 minutes. Nate nodded. Of course. Madeline brightened, grasping for control. Wonderful. I will have coffee sent in. Thomas looked at her with polite restraint. Thank you, but the discussion is limited to the investment team, Mr. Brooks and Ms. Carter. The exclusion was delivered so smoothly, it left no surface to argue against. Madeline's lips parted. But this is our home. Evelyn looked around the penthouse once, not possessively, not sadly, but with a kind of completed distance. Tonight, Thomas said, it is also a business environment. The words settled over the room like a curtain lowering. Madeline stepped back, her smile recovering just enough to protect her pride in public. Nate turned toward the library, but paused when he realized Evelyn was not following behind him. She was walking beside Thomas, portfolio in hand, her posture straight, her expression composed. Not a guest, not the woman he had left, not the employee Madeline had pitted beneath showroom lights. She was entering the room, where his future would be weighed, and for the first time, Nate understood that Evelyn had not come back into his life. He had simply wandered into the world she had built after him. The library doors closed behind them with a soft click, and the sound was small enough to be polite, final enough to change the evening. Outside, the reception continued in muted waves of music and conversation, but inside the library, the air was cooler, quieter, touched by the faint scent of leather bindings and fresh coffee. Nate had rarely used this room during his marriage to Evelyn. Back then, it had been more showpiece than sanctuary, a wall of books selected by color, a desk chosen for scale rather than use, a room meant to suggest thoughtfulness without requiring it. Now it had been remade. The shelves held fewer objects and more space. The desk faced the city instead of the door. 2 low chairs had been placed near the window at a precise angle that allowed conversation without confrontation. Nate noticed all of this because Evelyn had taught him, too late, how to see. Thomas Vale took the chair at the head of the table, though he did not need the position to command attention. 2 board members sat to his right. Helen Morris, a gray-haired investor known for asking short questions that ended long careers, and Andrew Pike, a former hotel executive with a calm face and unreadable eyes. Evelyn sat across from Nate and opened her leather portfolio. Her hands were steady. That steadiness unsettled him more than anger would have. Anger could be answered, softened, blamed on memory. Professional calm offered no such escape. Thomas folded his hands. Mr. Brooks, we have reviewed your financial projections and expansion schedule. The numbers are ambitious. The locations are promising. The concern is whether Brooks Residential has the brand depth to survive beyond your personal reputation. Nate leaned forward slightly. This was familiar ground. Our brand is built on exclusivity, privacy, and high-performing urban properties. We are not trying to be everything to everyone. Helen Morris looked toward Evelyn. Ms. Carter, your assessment? Evelyn turned one page, and the faint sound of paper moving seemed to draw Nate's pulse into the silence. Brooks Residential understands acquisition, she said. It understands square footage, skyline value, and scarcity. What it does not yet understand is emotional permanence. Andrew Pike lifted his pen. Define that for us. Evelyn nodded. People may buy property because it is rare. They stay loyal to a brand because it makes them feel understood. The current Brooks model sells the view, the lobby, the address, the image of arrival. But it does not yet know how to sell belonging. Nate looked at her, caught somewhere between resistance and recognition. It was the kind of sentence he might once have dismissed as soft. Yet the people at the table were listening as though she had opened a door numbers alone could not. Evelyn continued. The properties are impressive, but many of the interiors feel interchangeable. Expensive, yes. Elegant at first glance. But emotionally thin. There is little narrative continuity from one building to the next. No sense that a resident is entering a Brooks environment rather than simply a luxury apartment with better marketing. Nate's fingers tightened around his pen. We have had strong sales across 3 major developments. You have, Evelyn said, because the market has rewarded surface confidence. But the next phase you are proposing requires repeat trust, not one-time admiration. Thomas watched her with quiet approval. Helen Morris made a note. Nate felt the room moving away from the version of success he had practiced for years. He wanted to argue, but the most difficult thing about Evelyn's report was that it did not sound personal. It sounded accurate. She was not punishing him. She was reading him. Beyond the library doors, Madeline passed once, then again, her heels slowing near the threshold. She could not hear the words clearly, only the low cadence of voices and the dreadful knowledge that Evelyn was inside the room where she was not allowed to stand. In the living room, guests continued to praise the space Madeline had claimed. Each compliment now felt borrowed. She lifted a glass of sparkling water and smiled at a woman from the museum board, but her attention remained fixed on the closed doors. Inside, Nate exhaled slowly. "And your recommendation?" he asked. Evelyn looked down at the final page, then back at him. For a moment, the past stood quietly between them. The old penthouse, the forgotten thank you notes, the investor dinners, the years of being useful and unseen. Then she let it pass. "My recommendation is not to proceed with funding at the requested scale," she said. "Not yet." The words did not crash. They settled. Thomas did not react. Helen underlined something in her notes. Andrew leaned back. Nate stared at Evelyn, and the strange thing was that his first emotion was not anger. It was grief, sharp and clean, for every time he had mistaken her clarity for silence. Evelyn closed the portfolio. "Brooks Residential can become what you say it is," she added, "but only if it stops confusing appearance with identity." Nate lowered his gaze. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered with 10,000 bright rooms, each one holding a story someone had bothered to build. For the first time, he wondered how many of his own rooms had only ever looked full because Evelyn had been standing quietly inside them. The decision did not arrive like a public disgrace. It arrived with the quiet professionalism of people who understood that money often left a room before pride did. Thomas thanked Nate for his presentation. Helen Morris closed her notebook, and Andrew Pike said the board would revisit the proposal after Brooks Residential completed a deeper brand repositioning plan. No one raised a voice. No one used cruel words. Yet Nate felt the future he had been holding in both hands become suddenly heavier, less certain, no longer obedient to his will. Evelyn gathered her papers with the same calm care she had shown in the showroom, and that calm pierced him more deeply than any accusation could have. "Evelyn," he said before she reached the door. The others paused, but Thomas glanced at her and continued toward the reception, giving them the privacy of a few measured seconds. Evelyn turned back. The library lights softened the edge of her profile, catching the small pearl at her ear, the one piece of jewelry he recognized from the life before all this. He remembered her wearing those pearls to his first award dinner, standing beside him while he thanked his partners, his investors, his team, everyone except the woman who had spent 3 nights preparing the home reception that one half of them over. "I need to understand," Nate said quietly. "Was this because of us?" Evelyn's expression did not change, but something in her eyes moved, not pain exactly, more like a door opening onto a room he had never been brave enough to enter. "No," she said. "That is what makes it difficult for you." He frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means you are used to being the center of the story. Even now, you want my judgment to be about you. About what you did. About what I felt. About whether I forgave you." She held the portfolio against her side, her posture straight but not defensive. "The report is about your company, Nate. The fact that it resembles the way you treated people is not my fault." The words were not loud, but they left no place to hide. Behind him, the city glowed through the windows, grand and indifferent. Nate looked down at the desk, at the smooth grain of what Evelyn's team had restored, and he saw, with sudden clarity, how much of his life had been polished by hands he never thanked. "I was unfair to you," he said. "It was too small." They both knew it. The sentence sat between them like a glass of water offered after a house had already burned down. Evelyn did not rescue him from its inadequacy. She simply waited. Nate swallowed. I thought ambition had to be loud. I thought if something was quiet, it was less important. Evelyn's gaze softened by the smallest degree, but it was not an invitation. It was recognition, and recognition was not the same as return. I know, she said. I lived under that mistake for years. Outside the library, Madeline's laughter rose too sharply from the living room, then disappeared beneath the jazz. Nate looked toward the door. He could imagine her standing among guests, trying to keep the evening intact with charm and diamonds, trying to hold a room that had already learned whose mind built it. She did not. No, he said, though he was not sure whether he was defending Madeline or himself. No, Evelyn replied. She did not ask. That was the smallest sentence of the night, and somehow the most complete. Madeline had not asked who designed the company. Nate had not asked who made his early success feel effortless. Their world had trained them to accept beauty as service and silence as permission. Evelyn had stopped granting both. The library door opened before Nate could answer. Madeline stood there, her smile careful, her eyes searching his face for victory and finding something else. Is everything settled? She asked. Thomas appeared behind her, gracious and unreadable. For tonight, he said. The board will not proceed at the current level. Madeline's smile flickered. Not proceed. The words trembled at the edges, not from sorrow, but from the shock of being excluded from a script she thought she controlled. Guests nearby began to notice the change in temperature. Conversations softened. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Nate stepped into the living room, but for once he had no perfect sentence ready. Evelyn followed at a respectful distance, not hiding, not performing, merely present. Madeline looked from Nate to Thomas, then finally to Evelyn. Slowly, painfully, understanding spread across her face. The woman she had pitied had not embarrassed her. That would have been easier to endure. Evelyn had simply been competent in public, truthful in private, and necessary in rooms Madeline could not enter. Thomas lifted his glass with quiet courtesy toward the completed penthouse. A beautiful environment, he said. Now the company must learn to deserve it. No one laughed. No one needed to. Evelyn placed her portfolio in Grace's hands and looked once around the room, at the candlelight, the linen, the polished walnut, the people standing inside a truth that had finally caught up with them. Then she turned toward the elevator, leaving the music behind her and taking nothing from the penthouse except the dignity she had brought in. The elevator doors were already parting when Nate called her name again. Not loudly, not with the confidence he once used to summon people across crowded rooms. This time, her name left him carefully, as if he understood it did not belong to him anymore. Evelyn stopped with one hand near the elevator panel. Grace stepped inside first, giving her a quiet look that asked whether she should stay. Evelyn gave a small nod toward the lobby button, and Grace understood. The doors remained open, waiting. Nate crossed the foyer beneath the warm light Evelyn's team had selected, past the console table she had approved, past the mirror positioned to catch the skyline without turning the room into a shrine to itself. Behind him, the reception had resumed in fragile fragments. Madeline stood near the fireplace, surrounded by guests who were suddenly too polite, too careful, too aware of the shape of disappointment. She did not follow him. Pride kept her still. Fear kept her watching. Just 1 minute, Nate said. Please. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. There had been a time when that word from him would have opened every locked room inside her. Please. Back then, it had meant forgive me for being late, forgive me for forgetting, forgive me for making you feel small, and then calling you sensitive when you noticed. She had mistaken apology for change so many times that eventually both words had lost their shine. Now, standing in the foyer of the penthouse she once called home, she heard the word clearly. It was not a key. It was only a sound. 1 minute, she said. Nate exhaled as if he had been granted something larger than time. I did not know you built all of this, he said. Carter and Vale. The clients. The reputation. I heard the name, of course. Everyone has. I just never connected it to you. Evelyn's expression remained composed. That is honest at least. It is embarrassing. It should be. The answer was so quiet that it did not feel cruel. It felt clean. Nate looked toward the living room, where Madeline was pretending not to listen. I think I spent years needing you to be smaller than me, he admitted. Maybe because if I saw what you were capable of, I would have had to ask what I was without you making everything look effortless. Evelyn held his gaze. The city hummed beyond the glass, 42 floors of distance between them and the street below. You were still yourself, she said. That was never the problem. The problem was that you needed me to disappear so your version of yourself could feel larger. His face tightened, but he did not look away. I am sorry. This time, the words were heavier. Not enough to change the past, but perhaps enough to stop insulting it. Evelyn let them rest between them. She did not rush to accept them. She had learned, over years of rebuilding, that forgiveness given too quickly sometimes became another form of service. Thank you for saying that, she replied. Nate seemed almost startled by the boundary inside her politeness. Is that all? He asked. Evelyn's eyes moved once more across the foyer. She remembered the first week after they bought the penthouse, how she had sat on the bare floor eating takeout from paper cartons while Nate took calls by the window, already chasing the next thing. She remembered believing that if she made the home warm enough, he might eventually learn to stay inside it with her. Now the home was warm, beautiful, complete, and it no longer asked anything from her. Yes, she said. That is all. Madeline's heels sounded softly on the floor behind him. She had come closer, unable to bear being left outside the moment. Her voice was careful, but the sweetness was gone. Evelyn, I owe you an apology too. Evelyn turned to her. Madeline looked smaller without the protection of certainty. The diamonds were still there, the silk, the perfect hair, but none of it could cover the simple fact that she had mistaken access for achievement. I was unkind, Madeline said. I thought. She stopped, because finishing the sentence would expose too much. I thought you were beneath me. I thought his choosing me meant I was worth more. I thought your silence meant defeat. Evelyn spared her the performance of confession. You thought what you were encouraged to think. Nate looked down. Madeline's eyes flickered toward him, then away. Evelyn continued, not sharply, only truthfully. But you also chose to enjoy it. Madeline swallowed. For once, no clever answer came. No polished pity. No social smile. Just the uncomfortable weight of being seen without decoration. The elevator gave a soft reminder chime. Evelyn stepped inside. Grace stood beside her, portfolio in hand, face unreadable. Nate took one step forward, then stopped himself. That restraint was perhaps the first respectful thing he had done all night. Will the report give us a path forward? He asked. Evelyn met his eyes as the doors began to close. Yes, she said. But you will have to build it without using anyone else as your foundation. The door slid shut before he could answer. In the mirrored metal, Evelyn saw her own reflection for one brief second. Calm, upright, untouched by the need to be believed. Then the elevator descended, carrying her away from the penthouse, not as the woman who had lost it, but as the one who had finally outgrown it. The elevator opened into the lobby with the soft hush of polished steel, and Evelyn stepped out into a different kind of quiet. Down here, 42 floors below the penthouse, the city had weighed again. Tires whispered over wet pavement outside the glass entrance. A doorman in a dark uniform nodded with the professional discretion of someone who had seen fortunes rise, marriages end, and people leave buildings with their faces carefully arranged. Grace walked beside Evelyn, holding the leather portfolio against her chest. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The lobby smelled faintly of rain, stone, and the white flowers arranged on the front desk. It was strange, Evelyn thought, how the same building could feel so different depending on whether it believed it owned you. Years ago, she had crossed this lobby with her shoulders folded inward, carrying a cardboard box of sketches and winter coats, aware of every curious glance from staff who pretended not to look. That night, the marble floor had felt endless. The revolving door had sounded like a verdict. Tonight, her steps were steady. The marble was just marble. The door was just a door. Outside, her car waited at the curb, black and quiet beneath the silver streetlights. Grace stopped before they reached it. You were kinder than they expected, she said. Evelyn looked through the glass at the traffic moving down the avenue. No, she replied softly. I was fair. People confuse the two when they are waiting to be punished. Grace absorbed that, then nodded. Thomas sent a message. He said the board appreciated the clarity of your recommendation. They want to revisit Brooks Residential in 6 months, but only if Nate restructures the brand team and separates the company identity from his personal image. Evelyn gave a faint smile, not triumphant, only thoughtful. That would be good for them. For him too, Grace said. Evelyn did not answer immediately. Through the lobby windows, she could see her reflection layered over the city. Charcoal dress, pearl earrings, calm face. The shape of a woman who had once mistaken endurance for love because everyone around her called it loyalty. She thought of Nate upstairs, standing in the room she had completed, hearing for the first time that the future he wanted would require humility, not charm. She thought of Madeline, surrounded by candlelight and expensive linen, learning that pity could turn into a mirror when held long enough. Neither thought brought pleasure. That surprised her once, years ago, when she had imagined justice would feel like fire. Instead, it felt like a room finally set in order. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She glanced at the screen and saw an email from a London number she recognized. Confirmation for a full townhouse restoration in Notting Hill, 12,000 square feet, beginning in June. A project that would take her team across the Atlantic for half the summer. A project with no ghosts in the walls. Grace saw the subject line and raised her eyebrows. Is that the one? Evelyn opened the email, read the first few lines, and felt something warm and unforced move through her chest. Yes, she said. They accepted the proposal. Grace laughed quietly, the sound filled with relief and pride. That is a $3 million project. 3.2. Evelyn corrected, and for the first time that night, her smile reached her eyes. The doorman opened the lobby door, and cold air swept in, carrying the clean scent of rain on concrete. Evelyn stepped outside. Above her, the penthouse still glowed, a bright rectangle high in the building, filled with guests, questions, and the consequences of words finally spoken aloud. She looked up only once. Not with longing, not with anger. Simply to acknowledge a chapter that no longer knew how to hold her. Behind those windows, Nate would have to decide whether to become a better builder or remain a man skilled only at selling beautiful shells. Madeline would have to learn that being chosen by someone did not make another woman disappear. And the room, beautiful and warm and perfectly lit, would continue doing what Evelyn had designed it to do, reveal people to themselves. Her driver opened the rear door, but Evelyn paused before getting in. On the sidewalk, a young woman in a navy coat slowed near the showroom bag Grace carried, recognizing the Carter and Vale crest embossed in gold. "Excuse me," the woman said shyly. "Are you Evelyn Carter?" Evelyn turned. "I am." The woman smiled with the kind of admiration that had nothing to do with scandal. "I saw your Brooklyn studio feature last month. I just wanted to say, your work made me apply to design school again. I had dropped out for a while." The city noise softened around them. Evelyn felt the old ache in her chest change shape, becoming something almost tender. "Then I am glad you saw it," she said. "Go back. Finish what belongs to you." The young woman nodded, eyes bright, and disappeared into the evening crowd. Grace looked at Evelyn, but said nothing. There were moments too honest for commentary. Evelyn entered the car, and as it pulled away from the curb, the penthouse lights slipped behind her, then vanished between towers of glass and stone. She did not need to take the home back. She had built something larger than a home. She had built a life where no one else held the title deed to her worth. By Monday morning, the story had already begun to move without Evelyn's help. Not as gossip, not exactly, but as the kind of quiet business truth that travels through private offices, investor breakfasts, and carefully worded phone calls. Brooks Residential would not receive the funding it had expected. Carter and Vale had completed a remarkable penthouse transformation. Evelyn Carter's assessment had been precise, unsentimental, and impossible to dismiss. In the Soho office, life continued with its usual graceful urgency. Fabric samples arrived from Milan. A client from Santa Barbara requested a virtual walkthrough. Grace reorganized the London project calendar across 3 time zones. Someone in the studio kitchen burned a bagel and apologized to the entire floor. Evelyn stood at the long work table beneath the skylight, reviewing stone samples for the Notting Hill townhouse, while morning light spilled across her hands. There was no victory speech, no dramatic announcement, no desire to relive the moment upstairs in the penthouse. The work was waiting, and the work had always been the place where she felt most free. Near noon, a courier delivered an envelope to the office. Heavy cream paper, no return address on the front. Evelyn recognized Nate's handwriting before Grace placed it on her desk. For a moment, the room around her softened into memory. The old kitchen island, the first investor dinner, the elevator closing, the rain on her sketches. Then she opened it. The letter was short. Nate wrote that the board had asked him to delay the expansion and rebuild the company's creative leadership from the ground up. He wrote that her report had been difficult to read because it was fair. He wrote that he had confused being admired with being understood, and that he was only beginning to see how many rooms in his life had been warmed by work he never credited. At the end, he did not ask to meet. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply wrote, "Thank you for telling the truth when it would have been easier to punish me with it." Evelyn read the line twice. Then she folded the letter and placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk, not as a treasure, not as an old wound, but as a document filed at last in the correct place. Across town, Madeline stood alone in the penthouse after the rental florists collected the last of the reception arrangements. Without guests, without music, without the performance of being envied, the apartment felt almost too honest. The curved sofa still held its perfect shape. The limestone wall glowed softly in the afternoon. Every detail was beautiful, and none of it belonged to her in the way she had wanted it to. She ran her fingertips along the dining table and thought of Evelyn's face in the showroom, calm beneath insult, patient beneath pity. For the first time, Madeline wondered what kind of woman she might become if she stopped measuring herself against another woman's loss. The question frightened her. It also stayed. That evening, Evelyn returned to the Brooklyn studio where Carter and Vale had truly begun. She kept the space after the company moved to Soho, partly for storage, partly for memory, partly because there were some rooms a person should never renovate beyond recognition. The radiator still clanged. The windows still rattled when trucks passed below. Against one wall stood the old borrowed sofa where she had slept with measurements written on her wrist. On the work table lay the rain-marked sketch she had taken from the penthouse years ago, now framed but not hidden. Thomas met her there with 2 cups of coffee and the quiet smile of a man who had witnessed the arc of a life without trying to claim ownership of it. "London will change the company," he said. Evelyn looked around the small studio, at the paint stains on the floor and the shelves of early samples labeled in her own handwriting. "No," she said softly. "It will expand it. This changed the company." Thomas nodded, understanding the difference. Later, after he left, Evelyn turned off the overhead lights and left only the desk lamp glowing. The studio became gold at the edges, shadowed in the corners, full of the gentle evidence of survival. She thought about the penthouse high above Manhattan, the home she had once believed was proof of being chosen. She thought about the showroom, where Madeline had mistaken humility for failure. She thought about Nate, finally facing a mirror no designer could soften for him. Then she thought about the young woman on the sidewalk who had decided to return to design school because a stranger's work had reminded her of her own unfinished life. That was the part Evelyn carried with her. Not the silence in the penthouse. Not the shock on Madeline's face. Not Nate's regret arriving years too late. The real ending was smaller and greater than that. A woman standing in a lobby, telling another woman to finish what belonged to her. Evelyn picked up a pencil and began sketching the first room of the London townhouse. The line started lightly, almost invisibly, then grew sure beneath her hand. Outside, Brooklyn moved through the night in traffic sounds and distant sirens and the low hum of ordinary lives continuing. She smiled to herself, not because she had taken revenge, but because she had stopped needing the world that hurt her to witness her healing. He had kept the penthouse. His new wife had kept the name. But Evelyn had kept the gift they never understood. She could walk into an empty room and imagine a future. Then she could build it.